Well, welcome everybody. This is part 4 of our series, Crisis Selling During a Black Swan. Pleasure to have you here today. Today's theme is earning the right to the second call, the inescapable idea. And we'll be drawing on the ideas in my book, Innovate Now. We'll show some ideas for innovation today. Why do we set time aside to improve? Here we lean on the learnings from the book E-Myth by Michael Gerber. Instead of working in the business, we take this time together to work on the business. It's a time to be thoughtful. So, are you ready for an exciting webinar? Then you should fasten your mental seatbelt and prepare to launch a little bit into the unknown. It may seem like a bit of a wild ride, but we will get you landed safely by the end of the webinar today. So welcome. We started this webinar series during COVID-19. It's been a changing scenario. It keeps on changing and we need to change. I mean, here's some news that some governors are moving ahead with reopening. Not quite so much yet in New York and New Jersey, where I am. But this will continue to change over time, and our selling needs will continue to change over time. Our theme again is focusing on the second call and developing relationships. And it's a great way to prepare yourself for your slingshot strategy, right? So are you ready for the market rebound? How do we ensure a second call can be part of the market rebound? So then for context, you're actually in your first sales call, and we want to ensure that there's a second sales call. Let's step back for a moment to set the context. How did we get to the first sales call? This is a bit of a quick review of some of the ideas we covered in previous webinars. A fundamental idea that drives our selling process forward is that the prospect is on a false summit or a false peak. So they're over here and they're looking down. And we're going to show them that there's a higher peak of well-being out there. And that's why they're going to come to us. This is the essence of persuasion, is that the prospect is looking down and we help them bring them to a higher level of well-being. And that's how we earn the right to access. And it also gives us moral certainty and we feel good about what we do. Now, as we move the prospect forward, we're taking them on a journey on the change curve. The ideas in this slide come from a book called On Death and Dying. And the basic idea is whenever there's change, there's grieving. And so we're taking the prospect through a grieving process because he, she, they are dealing with somebody else, and there's grieving and giving up what they've been doing. When we first meet the prospect, they often tell us or express the idea that I'm good. And when we share some ideas, they tell us they don't need what we have. And then when we give them evidence, they might get pissed at us because we're putting them in harm's way. They may have to change. And what we're experiencing here is the closed mindset. And the key thing we need to do is open the closed mindset. And we do this with what we call type 3 knowledge. What they don't realize, they don't know. And here's the real key to selling, is taking the prospect from resistance to and closed mindset to the open mindset and exploration. Because once they get there, they can move forward to hope and commitment. And so the core of our job is right here in going from resistance, closed mindset to the open mindset. So what are a couple of ways to do that? How do we get people to open their minds? We looked at a number of ways in the last few webinars. I just want to briefly recount one of them for you. C-suite executives want to know how to extend the life cycle of their business or service. Well, so briefly, we talked about the example of Coca-Cola, which you could say has had a life cycle for over 125 years, but when we peel back the onion, we see something different. It's been an experience of nonstop innovation. So formulation has changed. You know, Coca-Cola was initially called Coca-Cola because it had cocaine in it. The packaging has changed. Initially, you went to a drugstore, then you got it in glass bottles, then in metal, now in plastic. Distribution has changed, again, starting with drugstores, then convenience stores, grocery stores. Now you can get them anywhere. You know, there are machines anywhere you could get Coca-Cola. And finally, the advertising has changed radically over the years, hasn't it? So another way to look at it, if you look at the illustration here, instead of one long life cycle, maybe what we have is a lot of little life cycles. And so bringing innovation, the extend life cycle, that's something that should get C-suite attention. So one way to be thoughtful, this is a review, is what can you do to extend the life cycle of your prospects? So to secure that second call, one place of wisdom from which we can learn is from Scheherazade, 1001 Nights. So briefly, the story there was the king or the sultan spent each night with a different woman and beheaded her at dawn because he had an unfaithful wife. And Scheherazade used the time they were together to offer a story. Maybe it was the story of Aladdin and his magical lamp. And she so told the story that by dawn, when the time together was over and she was supposed to be beheaded, instead of being beheaded, she left the story off in the middle of the story, and the Sultan wanted to see her again the next night. And so she finished the story the next night and then started another story, which did not end by the end of their time together. And this went on for 1001 nights, and eventually the Sultan fell in love and married him. So what is your Scheherazade strategy to set up the next call? One of our features here is a power of the wisdom in the room feature. So I want to offer this to you as an idea to bring back to your company as an exercise. What is your Scheherazade strategy? What is it that you do that sets up the next call? So I'm going to ask you to just grab a pencil and paper and jot down a few notes. What do you do when you're in that first phone call to set up the next call? And I would also recommend that you bring this back as an exercise. Just blast it out to the whole sales team. One idea, one sentence. What do you do that's a great Scheherazade strategy that gets you into your second call? By the way, I think I put less material in this webinar, so if anybody wants to ask a question or share an idea, I'm going to try to have a couple of minutes at the end to answer questions. And if someone has a great Scheherazade strategy, use the chat to send it to me, and I'll share it with all the participants. Now, a classic Scheherazade technique, and possibly one you're using, is the standard two-call close. So on the first call, you uncover a problem, and the second call, you discuss a solution to the problem. So you say, wow, that's a big problem. Let me study it and get back to you. And now you have like a Scheherazade strategy. The prospect wants to hear what is the solution to the problem. Important note here, book your second call when you're on your first call, because it's really hard to get people back on the phone. So that's a great time saver if you book your second call on your first call. But the challenge we face is, will they share the big problem that sets up your Scheherazade strategy? Now, before moving forward with a method to get them to share their big problem, I want to put this in the context of the standard sales call. Now, our standard sales call has three parts, and I'm reviewing them briefly. Steps 1 to 7 sets up the serious conversation so that in steps 8 to 12, they'll share the big problem, which sets up the second call. And then in that second call, you're going to diagnose, you're going to show a solution, and prove we're the solution. That's a very, simplified selling process. And we're going to do something in the warming up here that will allow us to motivate the prospect to share their big problem, because that's a big issue. So we want to develop an idea that's inescapable, which will cause them to share a problem, setting up your Scheherazade scenario. The inescapable idea starts with some kind of hot button, something that attracts the prospect's attention. Might put the prospect into search mode. What's that? The prospect's just willing to investigate. So how do we persuade prospects to share? Sometimes you get into a first meeting and the prospect goes, well, it's your 15, 20 minutes. What do you have to say? What you want to know is what are the problems that we need to solve, right? So the formula for the inescapable idea, and we're going to do an exercise in this in a minute or two, is we start with a hot button. We treat it with bold vision improving. And these are subjects we talked about in previous webinars. And then we go for prospect validation. You remember from the last webinar, we talked about how do you get a wow? And that becomes urgency. Until the prospect validates, we don't know that we have urgency. So then we take client urgency and we treat it, and we'll talk about this, with a proven defendable position, and that becomes the inescapable idea. What we want to do is move the conversation into uncontested space. So here we draw on the book of Blue Ocean Strategy or Marketing. We want to go from red ink, where we can't win, to a blue ocean of uncontested space. Another way to put this is, we don't want the prospect to take our great idea and go to the incumbent with it. So we need to kind of build into the idea a blue ocean that makes it defendable. How do you smoke out this hot button? Our experience as authentic consultants, this is a key way to do this. We demonstrate domain competence. So to give an example, when I have a first meeting for UBS, which is urgency-based selling, sometimes the prospect will say, here's why I granted you a meeting. And sometimes they'll want me to go first. So what do you do when you go first? So I'll give some background and I'll say, here are some common problems that people have who invite me into a conversation. Sales team is not having enough first meetings, not getting enough warm introductions. And on every 2 or 3, I'll say, I'm hoping you're not having that kind of challenge, are you? Not closing enough. Our closing ratio is not high enough. Not defending our pricing. Sometimes there's too much competitive pricing and we're cutting our pricing too much. And sometimes there's a hope that the sales team members' behavior will be bolder. These are all examples or common challenges I hear about. I've had over 120 clients over the years. Maybe it's 130 now. And so as I'm sharing this with a prospect, typically an owner or a VP of sales or what have you, usually as I'm going through this, at a certain point, they'll say, oh yeah, I have that problem. I have that problem. And either I get a response or I get a wow at that moment. Let's put this again in the context of the standard sales call, right? So we're getting the wow in the warm-up, and it's causing them to start to share what are their problems, what's going on. So here's the formula. Hot button. Let's say it's not enough first meetings. That's why I'm getting invited into the conversation. Bold vision proving. By asking the right questions, I'm showing domain competence, but I'm also showing as much as I can like experience, that I've had experience with this sort of challenge. Customer validation. I'm looking for them either to express an emotion or answer a question. And then finally, I want to introduce what I consider is essential to urgency-based selling, which is the salesperson as hero, which I think makes it a defendable position. So that's an example of me using kind of like a hot button and then developing it into an inescapable idea. So what I'd like you to do right now is take a minute, write down these headings on a piece of paper, and see if you can lay out a formula for developing an inescapable idea in your business. What's the hot button you address? What's the bold vision, the solution, and the proving that you offer? What's the customer's validation? And how do you make it a defendable position? Bringing it to an inescapable idea that buys you, earns you the right to the second meeting, because that's what we're looking for, is a second meeting here. So would you write down these headings on a piece of paper and then fill them in? Hot button, bold vision proving, customer validation, defendable position, inescapable idea. And again, if someone has something they want to quickly share, please send me a chat message. I'll be monitoring this as we go forward. Not a problem. And I also want to suggest to you that this could become a power of the wisdom in the room exercise for your entire sales team. Share this with everybody. Share this exercise. What is your hot button? How do you prove your case? What makes it a defendable position? And let's say you have 10, 20 people on your sales team. Everybody shares this. I think you're going to have a wealth of great ideas. And this is typically something we do when we do our training. So the inescapable idea, hot button, bold vision, customer validation, defendable position. That's it. And our standard sales call helps move us towards the inescapable idea, where the foundation is bold vision and proving. Let's set this in the theory of the glasses. Let's set all this in the theory of the glasses. Now, the hot button is like a must-have. It's something that the prospect must have. And so what we theorize is that on a prospect's desk, there are invisible glasses, and each glass stands for a different decision criteria. So once you have the hot button, you want to use that to smoke out the rest of them. Because if you only know, let's say there were 4 decision criteria. If you only know 3, you can't possibly be in control. So we need to identify and then fill the glasses. Once we know the names of the glasses, in the second call with the Scheherazade technique, we come back and we fill the glasses, right? So we need to identify and fill the glasses. Now, let's say when you get conditions from the prospect for closing, they're too easy for the incumbent competitor to meet. That's where, we really have to make a strategic decision and say to ourselves, do we need to add a glass to get to a defendable position? For example, testimonials are not as common as they should be, and testimonials could be a way to distinguish us and get a defendable position relative to our competition. Let's put this in the context of the battle plan. This is an actual battle plan from a client, and the challenge is the customer's not familiar with us. So the battle plan, just to go through it kind of briefly, names who's the prospect, are there critical dates, it defines a success. I have a video, 1-minute video on this if you'd be interested in watching it. And then who's the decision maker, what's their urgency, what's their sense of risk. What I want to draw to your attention right now is the tactical checklist. The tactical checklist that you prepare for your battle plan, and your battle plan is a way to weave a whole number of sales calls together, whether it's 2, 3, 4, or more. Here are the things that you can use to address the hot button. What is your material difference? Articles you've written, testimonial letters, PR about your company, the economic justification, internal referrals, the backgrounder, risk reduction strategies. All of these are things that you can use to explore or provoke the hot button to come out. So what are some takeaways from today? We need to earn the right to the second conversation. Don't think that just because you're in a first conversation, you'll have a second one. Use the Scheherazade technique, the 2-call close. Identify the problem on the first meeting, solve it on the second meeting. Of course, this assumes you're not in a 1-call close business. Often you need the inescapable idea to smoke out the problem. So work on your formula for the inescapable idea. And both with the Scheherazade technique and the inescapable idea, I recommend that you share this with the folks in your company as an exercise. Well, we know that Rome wasn't built in a day. We've almost come to the end of today's webinar. I want to take a quick look and see if we have a question or two. We just could take a minute. Here's a couple of questions. What if the person you're talking to is not the ultimate decision maker? Well, one of the options you have is to use this approach to recruit them as an internal ally to get an introduction to a higher level decision maker. But what if you're doing this and there are contracts in place? Well, if there's no clause to break the contract, then the best you could do is get on the on-deck circle. What if the last question I'll take here? What if the person is like impervious to what you're saying? They're like asleep, they're brain dead. So if there is somebody higher in the organization, you may need to go higher in the organization. That's my thought here. If you have any questions, you can send me an email at andy@urgencybasedselling.net. Our next webinar is on 5/12. The title is The Truth About Selling, Why Salespeople are Heroes, and What Does a Heroic Salesperson Do? So thank you very much for joining us today. It was a pleasure to have you. If you have any follow-up questions, please send me an email. And I look forward to seeing you in our next webinar on 5/12, The Truth About Selling. Thanks again. Have a great day. Bye-bye now.